In 1987, saying, "Let's go to Chi-Chi's," was code for, "Tonight, we're living dangerously." Not because the food was actually spicy, it wasn't, but because Chi-Chi's represented something radical for Middle America. The audacious idea that ordinary families from Minnesota could handle exotic Mexican cuisine. Chi-Chi's wasn't just a restaurant chain. It was cultural diplomacy served with a side of refried beans. For millions of Americans who had never been south of Kansas City, Chi-Chi's was their first passport to what they imagined Mexico might taste like, if Mexico had been designed by a focus group in Minneapolis. At its peak, Chi-Chi's operated over 200 locations and had become synonymous with Mexican food for an entire generation of Americans. Then, in 2004, it vanished almost overnight. Not gradually, not through slow decline, but in a sudden, catastrophic collapse that left empty buildings and confused customers across the Midwest. This isn't just the story of a restaurant chain that grew too fast and fell too hard. It's the story of how America's relationship with Mexican food evolved from fear to fascination to tragedy, and how one contaminated batch of green onions destroyed a billion-dollar empire in a matter of months. The story begins in 1975, when two unlikely partners decided that frozen Minnesota needed a taste of sunny Mexico, even if they had to invent their own version of what that meant. Max McGee wasn't your typical restaurateur. He was a former Green Bay Packers wide receiver who had caught passes from Bart Starr and Vince Lombardi, a football hero looking for his second act in the business world. His partner, Marno McDermott, was an experienced restaurant operator who understood the mechanics of running a successful dining establishment. But neither man was Mexican, had extensive experience with Mexican cuisine, or had spent significant time in Mexico. What they had was something more valuable in the 1970s America: the confidence to believe they could improve on authentic ethnic food by making it more palatable to Midwestern tastes. The name Chi-Chi's came from McDermott's wife's nickname, a sweet personal tribute that the founders apparently didn't realize was also Spanish slang for breasts. This accidental double entendre would become emblematic of Chi-Chi's entire approach to Mexican culture, well-intentioned but fundamentally misunderstood. The first Chi-Chi's location opened in Minneapolis in 1975, creating something that had never existed before: a Mexican restaurant designed specifically for people who were afraid of Mexican food, offering culinary adventure with training wheels for customers who considered black pepper exotic and viewed anything spicier than ketchup with deep suspicion. The timing was perfect for what would become known as the Tex-Mex boom. America in the 1970s was becoming more adventurous about food, but gradually and safely. Chi-Chi's found itself perfectly in this cultural sweet spot. They offered Mexican food that was recognizably foreign but comfortingly familiar. Tacos that tasted like hamburgers, burritos that felt like sandwiches, and margaritas that went down like fruit punch. The restaurant's design reinforced this carefully calculated exoticism. Walking into Chi-Chi's was like entering a Hollywood set designer's idea of Mexico. Bright stucco walls, hanging sombreros, fake cacti, and string lights that suggested perpetual fiesta. It was Mexico as imagined by someone who had seen The Three Amigos but never crossed the Rio Grande. The menu reflected the same philosophy. Chi-Chi's didn't serve authentic Mexican cuisine. They served American comfort food disguised as Mexican adventure. The famous chimichanga wasn't a traditional Mexican dish but rather an American invention, essentially a deep-fried burrito that satisfied American preferences for fried foods while maintaining the exotic appeal of a Spanish name. The chajitas, fajitas spelled with a CH for branding purposes, arrived on sizzling cast iron platters that created dramatic tableside theater. The sizzling sound and rising steam suggested danger and authenticity, but the actual food was mild enough for children and seniors. Chi-Chi's genius lay in understanding that most Americans in the 1980s wanted the social experience of eating exotic food more than they wanted actually exotic flavors, creating a carefully orchestrated illusion of culinary adventure that satisfied customers' desire to feel worldly and sophisticated without challenging their fundamentally conservative Midwestern palates. By 1986, Chi-Chi's had exploded to over 200 locations across the United States, with heavy concentration in the Midwest. The success attracted corporate attention. Former KFC executive Shelby Frank took over operations and brought the same systematic approach that had made Colonel Sanders a household name. Under Frank's leadership, Chi-Chi's developed signature dishes that became cultural phenomena. The sweet corn cake, a dessert-like side dish that customers ordered by the scoop, became so popular that people planned entire visits around it. The Mexican fried ice cream, served in oversized glasses and topped with honey and whipped cream, created Instagram-worthy moments decades before Instagram existed. The all-you-can-eat lunch buffet transformed Chi-Chi's from a dinner destination into a midday institution. For under $7, customers could sample over 40 items, creating their own Mexican food education through unlimited experimentation. The lunch buffet represented Chi-Chi's at its most American. The concept that cultural exploration could be improved through unlimited quantities, all-you-can-eat access, and the fundamental belief that more choices automatically meant a better, more authentic, and ultimately satisfying ethnic dining experience for customers seeking both value and adventure. Chi-Chi's drink program was equally ambitious. This was the 1980s, when bigger automatically meant better, so every cocktail arrived in glasses the size of goldfish bowls. The Chi-Chi cocktail, vodka, pineapple juice, and coconut cream, had no connection to Mexican drinking culture but became a signature drink because it sounded Mexican and tasted like vacation. By the late 1980s, Chi-Chi's had achieved something remarkable. They had convinced millions of Americans that they understood Mexican food, despite serving cuisine that would have been unrecognizable to anyone from Mexico. But success bred overconfidence, and overconfidence bred fatal mistakes. Chi-Chi's began expanding into markets where their sanitized version of Mexican cuisine couldn't compete with authentic alternatives. Opening locations in Texas, California, and New Mexico exposed Chi-Chi's as cultural cosplay rather than cuisine. In these markets, Chi-Chi's creative interpretations of classic dishes seemed bizarre rather than innovative. Simultaneously, competition was intensifying from chains that could deliver similar, safe ethnic experiences in other cuisines. Olive Garden mastered the same formula with Italian food. Texas Roadhouse offered Southwestern flavors without the Mexican cultural baggage. The fatal flaw in Chi-Chi's expansion strategy was assuming that their carefully crafted illusion of Mexican authenticity would work equally well in markets where customers had access to actual, authentic Mexican food, revealing the fundamental weakness of building a brand on cultural appropriation rather than genuine culinary excellence or innovation. Financial pressures mounted as expansion costs exceeded revenue growth. Many Chi-Chi's locations were enormous, over 12,000 square feet, requiring huge customer volumes to remain profitable. By 2002, Chi-Chi's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, but the company was still operating and attempting reorganization. Then came October 2003, and everything changed forever. The Monica, Pennsylvania. Chi-Chi's location became ground zero for the largest hepatitis A outbreak in United States history. Over 660 people were infected, and 4 people died from liver failure related to the contamination. The source was traced to green onions served in the complimentary chips and salsa, the free appetizer that every customer received before ordering. The hepatitis outbreak wasn't just a food safety disaster. It was a betrayal of the fundamental trust that families had placed in Chi-Chi's as a safe space for culinary adventure, revealing that the chain's promise of exotic excitement without real risk had been tragically, literally false all along. The contaminated green onions had been imported from farms in Mexico with inadequate sanitation systems. The irony was devastating. Chi-Chi's had spent decades serving Americanized versions of Mexican food to customers who wanted the excitement of Mexico without the risks, only to be destroyed by actual contamination from actual Mexico. Over 9,000 people in the Pittsburgh area required immunoglobulin shots as a preventive measure. Lawsuits flooded in, with settlements reaching millions of dollars. One victim required a liver transplant and received a $6.25 million settlement. Chi-Chi's attempted damage control by removing green onions from all menu items and settling lawsuits quietly, but the brand's reputation was irreparably destroyed. The company that had built its identity on making Mexican food safe for American families had served the deadliest restaurant-related contamination in U.S. history. By July 2004, when the final lawsuits were settled, Chi-Chi's had only 65 locations remaining. In September, Outback Steakhouse purchased the real estate assets for $42.5 million, not not the brand, recipes, or operations, just the buildings. That same weekend, every remaining U.S. Chi-Chi's location closed permanently. The sudden closure of every Chi-Chi's location in September 2004 marked the end of an era when Americans could pretend that cultural appropriation was harmless entertainment, forcing a reckoning with the reality that superficial engagement with other cultures often masked dangerous ignorance about the complexities and responsibilities that come with authentic cross-cultural exchange. Only one Chi-Chi's location survived, in Vienna, Austria, as far from Mexico as geographically possible. That final outpost operated until 2024, serving Austrian customers the same Americanized Mexican food that had once dominated the Midwest. Today, Chi-Chi's exists primarily as a grocery store brand owned by Hormel Foods, selling salsa, tortilla chips, and taco seasoning. In 2025, Michael McDermott, son of co-founder Marno McDermott, announced plans to revive Chi-Chi's as a modernized restaurant chain. Chi-Chi's legacy is complicated. The chain introduced millions of Americans to flavors that broadened their culinary horizons, even if those flavors weren't authentically Mexican. For many families, Chi-Chi's represented adventure, celebration, and shared experiences that created lasting positive memories. But Chi-Chi's also represents the problematic aspects of cultural appropriation in American dining. The tendency to sanitize and commercialize other cultures' foods until they bear little resemblance to their origins. The hepatitis outbreak revealed the ultimate irony. A chain that had spent decades protecting American customers from authentic Mexican flavors was ultimately destroyed by authentic Mexican contamination. The real risk had never been spicy food or unfamiliar flavors. It had been the food safety failures that authentic Mexican restaurants had largely avoided through traditional preparation methods. In the end, Chi-Chi's wasn't really about Mexican food at all. It was about American families' desire to feel worldly and adventurous without leaving their comfort zones. The chain succeeded by making foreign seem familiar and exotic seem safe. The tragedy is that this carefully constructed illusion was ultimately destroyed by real foreign contamination, proving that authentic cultural engagement can't be avoided forever, and that sometimes the real risks come from the places you least expect them.